She was counting tip money in the parking lot when she heard the first crack of his voice through the restaurant's glass door. Theresa sat in the driver's seat of her 2009 Civic with the engine off and the heat still bleeding out of the vents, fanning the bills across her thigh with practiced focus. $31. She knew exactly what $31 meant. It meant the copay for her mother's refill on Friday. It meant 2 days of rice and eggs without anxiety. It meant she wouldn't have to call her cousin Adwoa and ask for anything, which she hated doing more than almost anything in the world. She folded the bills carefully, tucked them back into the inside pocket of her jacket, zipped it, and grabbed the insulated pizza bag from the back seat. The restaurant was called Hanok Fusion, one of 6 Korean-owned spots clustered on this particular stretch of Buford Highway in northeast Atlanta, wedged between a Ghanaian hair-braiding salon and a Vietnamese grocery with hand-painted signs in the window. It was a Thursday night in October, cool enough that the outdoor diners had moved inside, which meant the place was packed and warm and smelled like doenjang and fryer oil and somebody's birthday somewhere in the back. Theresa pushed through the door with her hip, pizza bag in hand, eyes already scanning for the pickup counter. And that's when she heard it. I said, "You don't have your wallet, you don't eat. It's very simple." The manager's voice was loud enough to cut through the dinner noise. He was a compact man in his late 40s, with a company polo stretched across his chest and the particular energy of someone who had been waiting for an excuse all evening. He was standing over a small table near the window, and sitting at that table was an elderly Korean woman in a dark coat, her white hair pinned neatly, her hands folded in her lap with a kind of terrible stillness. The food was right there on the table in front of her. He hadn't taken it yet, but his hand was moving toward the plate. "Please," the woman said softly. Her English was careful, formal, the kind built over decades rather than childhood. "I will call my son. He will—" "I don't need you to call anyone." He leaned in slightly. "I need you to pay, or I need you to leave. And if you don't do one of those 2 things in the next 60 seconds, I'm going to have to ask the staff to help you out. And then I'm going to call the police because this is private property and you are—" "Excuse me." Theresa hadn't decided to speak. It was the kind of thing that happened before the brain approved it. She was standing 3 feet away, pizza bag still hanging from her hand, and every person at the surrounding tables was looking at her now. The manager straightened up and looked at her with genuine irritation. "This doesn't concern you." "How much is the meal?" Theresa said. He blinked. "What?" "Her meal." Theresa nodded toward the table. "What does it cost?" A beat. The restaurant had gone quiet in that specific way restaurants go quiet when something real is happening, which is different from when someone drops a tray. $22, he said slowly, like he was testing something. Theresa unzipped her jacket. She pulled out the folded bills. She peeled off 2 10s and 3 1s and set them on the edge of the table with one hand, flat and unhurried, the way her mother had taught her to handle money in public. Never desperate, always deliberate. "There you go," she said. "She's paid." Welcome to Afro Korean drama. Every story on this channel is written and produced right here, original, from the ground up. This one I've been sitting with for a while. It's about what happens when quiet dignity walks into a room full of power and neither side realizes what just started. If you love emotionally rich cross-cultural storytelling, you are exactly where you need to be. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Also, if you enjoy stories like these and want early access to new ones, you can join the Afro Korean Drama membership to help support the channel. Now, let's go back in. The manager stared at the money, then at Theresa, then at the room which was watching him with the particular patience of people who have already decided how they feel. He picked up the bills without another word and walked back toward the register. The elderly woman looked up at Theresa. Her eyes were dark and very steady, and something in them was harder to read than simple gratitude. It was closer to assessment, like she was looking at something she hadn't expected to find here. "Sit down for a moment," the woman said. It wasn't quite a request. Theresa glanced toward the pickup counter. Her order wasn't ready yet. She could see the kitchen was still in motion. She sat. "You didn't have to do that," the woman said. "I know," Theresa said. "You work hard for that money." Theresa almost smiled. "How do you know how hard I work?" The woman looked at her jacket, her shoes, the faint tension around her eyes that comes from a long shift in cold air. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. "My mother taught me," Theresa said after a moment. "She said if you see someone who needs help and you don't help them, you're lying about who you are." She shrugged. "I can't afford to lie like that." The woman was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What is your name?" "Theresa." "I am Park Sun-hee." She said it the Korean way, surname first, with a small, formal nod that belonged in a different kind of room than this one. "Thank you, Theresa." The pickup counter called her order number. Theresa stood, tucked the pizza bag under her arm and said, "Get home safe, Mrs. Park." She didn't look back. She had 4 more deliveries before midnight. Outside on Buford Highway, the air smelled like exhaust and roasted chestnuts from the cart 2 storefronts down. Theresa loaded the bag into her car, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot. She did not notice the 3 black SUVs parked in a line along the far edge of the lot, engines idling, no one getting out. One of the men in the middle vehicle pressed his phone to his ear. His voice was low, almost bored. "It was a girl," he said. "Young, pizza uniform. She paid for the meal herself, cash from her jacket." A pause. His eyes tracked Theresa's Civic as it merged into traffic. "Yes, sir," he said. "We'll find out who she is." Theresa's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a complex off Memorial Drive that had been optimistically renovated sometime around 2014 and had been quietly declining since. The elevator worked on Tuesdays and Fridays. Tonight was Thursday. She climbed the stairs with the kind of tired that lives in the joints, not the muscles, unlocked the door with the key that always stuck on the first try, and came inside to the sound of the television on low and her mother's breathing. Celestine Mensah was 58 years old and looked, on good days, like a woman of 45 who had made peace with something difficult. On bad days, she looked her age and a little past it. Tonight, she was propped against 2 pillows on the second-hand couch, a Ghanaian gospel station murmuring from the TV, a blanket across her lap that Theresa had bought at a church sale 3 years ago and never thrown out because her mother loved it. "You're late," her mother said without opening her eyes. "Traffic," Theresa said. She went to the kitchen, set a pot of water on the stove, and pulled a container of leftover groundnut soup from the fridge. Her mother had eaten, she could tell. The bowl on the counter had been rinsed, which meant her mother had been up, which was good. She came back to the living room with the evening's medication. 1 white pill for the blood pressure, 1 yellow one for the inflammation, a small orange one for something the doctor had explained 3 times, and Theresa still had to read off the label to remember. She placed them in her mother's palm with a glass of water, and her mother took them one by one without comment, the way they did this every night, like a small private liturgy. "How much tonight?" her mother asked. "Enough," Theresa said. Celestine opened her eyes. "Theresa." 31. A pause. 28, actually. I helped someone. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. Then she closed her eyes again and said, "Good girl." Theresa sat on the floor next to the couch, her back against the cushion, and ate her soup while the gospel station played something slow and harmonized. On the coffee table in front of her, a past-due utility notice, a nursing school pamphlet she'd printed at the library 6 months ago and folded and unfolded until the creases had gone soft, and a sticky note with a doctor's callback number she kept forgetting to dial during business hours. She looked at the pamphlet. She put it face down. She wasn't going to think about that tonight. She was too tired to want things tonight. On the other side of Atlanta, in a house in Dunwoody that sat behind a stone wall and an unmarked gate, a woman was being helped out of a town car. The house was the kind of structure that communicated wealth without announcing it. Georgian exterior, mature trees, a driveway that curved in a way that cost money. Inside, it was warm and ordered and smelled faintly of pine and something braised. 3 men in dark clothing moved through the property at measured intervals, not quite patrol, not quite decoration. Park Sun-hee walked through the front door and set her coat on the rack by the entrance with the deliberate care of a woman returning to a space she ran with perfect, quiet authority. Her son was in the study. Sang Ha-jun was 37 years old, and he had one of those faces that was extremely difficult to read in still photographs and even harder in person. He wasn't large in the way that announced itself. He was built lean and compact, the kind of man who took up exactly as much space as he chose to. He was sitting behind a dark wood desk when his mother came in, 3 phones arranged in front of him, and an untouched glass of barley tea at his elbow, and he was looking at something on a laptop that he closed without hurry when she appeared in the doorway. "Oma," he stood. It was automatic, the way it's automatic for men who were raised a certain way and never stopped. "You're late. Jiho said there was a situation." Mrs. Park sat down in the chair across from his desk, not the guest chair positioned to the side, the chair directly across, the one that said, "We are having a conversation." She folded her hands in her lap. "There was a situation," she said. He waited. With his mother, he had learned waiting was almost always the correct move. She told him. Not dramatically. Mrs. Park Sun-hee had never been a dramatic woman. She told it the way she told most things, with precision and an economy of detail that he had inherited from her, carefully separating what happened from how it made her feel, and then folding the emotion back in at the end where it had the most weight. She told him about the manager. She told him about the plate being moved. She told him about sitting there with her hands in her lap while people looked the other way. And then she told him about the girl. Sang Ha-jun listened without moving. The only thing that changed was a very slight tension at the edge of his jaw, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't specifically watching for it. His second-in-command, Yoon Mi-rae, was standing in the doorway behind Mrs. Park's chair. She had appeared there silently 3 minutes into the story, and Sang Ha-jun's eyes moved to her once, briefly, with an instruction in them that didn't require words. "She paid with her tip money," Mrs. Park said, "from her jacket, cash." She paused. "She didn't ask me anything. She didn't want anything. She just sat with me for a moment and told me her mother taught her not to ignore people who need help." Silence. "Her name is Theresa," Mrs. Park said. Sang Ha-jun picked up his barley tea, found it cold, and set it back down. "And the manager's name?" His mother looked at him evenly. "Ha-jun." "I'm going to deal with the restaurant," he said. "That isn't a question." "I know," she said. "I'm telling you about the girl." "I heard you, Ioma." She studied him for a moment in the way she had always studied him, not looking at his face, but at something slightly behind it, the thing that his face was covering. Then she stood, smoothed her coat, and said, "Don't be harsh about it." She meant the restaurant. She also might have meant something else. She left. Her footsteps were quiet down the hall. Sang Ha-jun sat for another moment in the silence. Then he looked at Yoon Mi-rae, who was still in the doorway. "Find the restaurant manager," he said, "and find the girl." Yoon Mi-rae's expression didn't change, which with her meant she was thinking more than she was showing. "The girl too?" "Theresa," he said. "Her name is Theresa." He turned back to the desk. "I want to know everything." Yoon Mi-rae was 34 years old, had worked for Sang Ha-jun for 6 years, and understood the architecture of his decisions better than almost anyone alive. She had grown up in Incheon, come to Atlanta at 19 on a student visa that had long since been rendered irrelevant, and built herself into exactly the kind of person who was indispensable to exactly the kind of operations she ran. She was not soft. She had never wanted to be soft. Softness, in her experience, was something people praised in others while quietly using it as a door. She started the investigation before she left the house. By the time she reached her car, She had 2 people already pulling footage from the restaurant, one person running the business license, and another beginning a quiet trace on the delivery driver based on the uniform and the plate number one of their men had caught on his phone camera. She didn't love this. Not the restaurant part. That was simple, clean, the kind of correction that sent a message without requiring anything messy. She didn't love the girl part. In her experience, when Sang Ha-jun's personal attention moved toward a civilian, especially a young woman, especially one his mother had already contextualized as morally extraordinary, it created variables. Variables were her least favorite thing. She filed this feeling away carefully and kept working. The restaurant results came back within 24 hours. The manager's name was Dennis Kwan, 46, second-generation Korean-American, had been managing Hanok Fusion for 4 years. Yoon Murray's team found 2 other incidents in the past year. A college kid accused of dine and dash who'd actually prepaid online, a Somali family asked to move tables twice in one evening. The owner of the restaurant, a man named Mr. Bay, who had 3 locations across Gwinnett County, had been informed of each incident and had done nothing about any of them. Sang Ha-jun reviewed the file for less than 4 minutes. Then he made 2 phone calls. The first was to someone who handled the kind of financial arrangements that made certain business licenses very difficult to renew. The second was to Mr. Bay directly. That conversation lasted 8 minutes. When it was over, Dennis Kwan cleaned out his locker that afternoon, and Mr. Bay sent a hand-delivered note to the address they provided, Mrs. Park's address, expressing his personal apology for the conduct of his staff and his regret for the distress caused. Mr. Bay did not know exactly who he was apologizing to. He suspected enough to write the note in very careful language. That was the restaurant. The girl took longer because the girl was more interesting. Theresa Abena Mensah, 26 years old, born in Decatur, Georgia to Celestine Mensah, who had immigrated from Ghana in 1993, and a father who had left when Theresa was 4 and existed now only as a name on a birth certificate, and an absence her mother had long since stopped explaining. Public school through graduation. 1 year of community college nursing prerequisites before her mother's diagnosis interrupted things. Had been delivering for various apps and contracted restaurants for 3 years. The current gig was through a regional chain, average income roughly between poverty line and just over it, with enough variability in tips that some weeks she ate well, and some weeks she moved money between accounts in a way that required concentration. Her mother's condition, chronic kidney disease, stage 3, managed with medication that cost more than the insurance covered, supplemented by a charitable prescription program Theresa had found online after 4 hours of research and 4 phone calls. One hospitalization 18 months ago that had cost $11,000, $10,000 of which was still in a payment plan that took $68 a month out of their lives. She had attended a Korean Presbyterian church in Clarkston for 3 years, not as a member, but because the congregation ran a food pantry on Saturday mornings and did not ask questions. She had, in those 3 years, learned enough Korean to follow a short sermon and order food confidently at a restaurant, which she had done exactly once as a personal triumph and never mentioned to anyone. She had applied to LPN programs twice. Both times, the application fee had been the easiest part. Yoon Murray read the file in full, set it down, and sat with it for a while. Then she forwarded it to Sang Ha-jun with a single line of annotation. Straightforward. No leverage points, no angles. She did not write what she was actually thinking, which was that the complete absence of angles was itself a kind of angle. Sang Ha-jun read the file at 11:30 at night, standing at the window of his study with the Atlanta skyline visible in the distance, orange and diffuse against the October clouds. He read the part about the church in Clarkston twice. He read the part about the nursing school applications. He noted the application fees. He put the file down on the windowsill and stood there for a while with his hands behind his back, looking at nothing specific. He was not a man who performed emotions for an audience, including himself. He sat with things until they became clear. What was becoming clear to him right now was not entirely comfortable. His mother had sat in that restaurant with her hands folded in her lap while people looked away, and one person hadn't looked away. That person had given away money she couldn't afford, and then gone home to count pill bottles and look at a pamphlet she hadn't let herself want for 6 months. He had grown up watching his mother be quietly extraordinary in rooms full of people who underestimated her. He had built an entire career on the principle that most people, given the opportunity to take the easy road, would take it every time. He priced the world accordingly. Theresa Mensah had not taken the easy road. She had taken the $22 road, and she hadn't mentioned it to her sick mother when she got home. He closed the file. In the morning, he would talk to Mireille. Yoon Mireille did not love mornings. She tolerated them. She was standing in Sang Ha-jun's kitchen at 7:15 with a cup of coffee when he came down, and she could read from the quality of his walk that he had been up for a while and had already made a decision. "I want to invite her," he said, going directly to the coffee. Mireille kept her voice neutral. "Invite her here?" "Somewhere appropriate, neutral. She'll be nervous," he considered. "The office is on Peachtree, the conference suite on 12. He paused. "Have my mother there." "Your mother?" "She'll trust my mother," he said. "She met her. There's a foundation there." Mireille looked at him for a beat longer than she usually let herself. "And the purpose of the meeting?" "I want to offer her help." "What kind of help?" "The medical bills, the program, the school." He set his coffee down. "She's qualified, she's been trying. She just doesn't have the money." Mireille was quiet for 3 seconds, which from her was a substantial response. "Ha-jun," she said. "Not sir, not boss. That was the distinction of their 6 years. She'll be terrified." "I know." "She may say no." He looked at Mireille with something patient and flat. "She might," he said, "but I want her to have the choice." Mireille nodded once. "I'll arrange it." She left the kitchen and walked down the hall and did not immediately make the call to the Peachtree offices. She stood at the window in the corridor for 2 minutes, watching the morning traffic on the street below. She was cataloging possibilities, the way she always did. The way she had been trained to by experience and by years of standing in the space between Sang Ha-jun's intentions and everything that could go wrong with them. She thought about Theresa's file, the absence of angles, the church in Clarkston, the folded pamphlet. Then she did something she told herself later was only prudent information management. She forwarded the full file, name, address, workplace, schedule, to a contact in a rival network. Not with instructions, not with a request, just with a note. FYI. New variable in the Dunwoody operation, letting the right people know there was a soft point if anyone ever needed one. Not a threat, just information made available, a door left slightly open. She told herself it was containment. She told herself she was protecting Sang Ha-jun from himself. She made the call to Peachtree and scheduled the meeting. Theresa had been having a bad week. Her mother's refill had been delayed by a billing error at the pharmacy. Not their billing error, the insurance company's, which meant 3 phone calls and 45 minutes of hold music before anyone would acknowledge that the claim had been processed incorrectly. The refill came through on day 3, which meant 2 days of her mother taking half doses and saying nothing about it until Theresa found the pill organizer on Wednesday morning and did the math. On top of that, deliveries had been slow. A rainstorm Tuesday night had flooded the parking lot behind the restaurant hub, and she'd had to park 3 blocks away both times, which cost 20 minutes and 2 deliveries she would have otherwise made. And then, on Thursday, the restaurant owner, a man named Carl who had always been decent to the drivers, told her, without meeting her eyes, that they were restructuring the delivery partnership and he'd be in touch about her hours. She knew what that meant. She'd heard it before. She drove home in the rain, parked the Civic, and sat in it for a few minutes before going upstairs. She wasn't crying. She was doing the math, which was worse. Without the delivery income, she had 9 days before the payment plan default, and maybe 12 before rent was a question. She was still sitting there when a text came through from a number she didn't recognize. "Good evening, Ms. Mensah. My name is Ji Young. I'm an assistant to a private firm in downtown Atlanta. A client of ours would very much like to meet with you regarding a matter of personal importance. This is not a sales call and you are not in any trouble. Would you be available to visit our offices on Peachtree sometime this week? All details attached." She stared at it for a while. Then she looked up the address in the attachment. The building was real. She could see it on the map, a proper office complex on Peachtree Street Northwest. The suite number was real. She replied, "What is this about?" 3 minutes passed. Then, "We'd prefer to explain in person, but it involves a meeting you may have had last week." Theresa sat with that for a moment. Last week. She had met exactly one person last week worth remembering. A small Korean woman in a dark coat who had said her name was Park Sun-hee and looked at Theresa like she was reading something. She typed, "Okay, Friday." She changed outfits 3 times on Friday morning, which she was annoyed at herself about. She settled on what she thought of as her interview clothes: dark slacks, a burgundy blouse, the good coat, and took the MARTA train downtown because she didn't trust the Civic's parking luck today. The building on Peachtree was everything the address promised. Marble lobby, security desk, a woman at the front who said, "Ms. Mensah, we've been expecting you," in a tone of such professional pleasantness that Theresa's heartbeat did something complicated. She was taken to the 12th floor. The elevator had classical music in it, which seemed pointed. The corridor was carpeted and quiet and smelled like recycled air and expensive things. The assistant, Ji Young, early 30s, warm, precise, walked her to a door and said, "They're waiting inside. Can I bring you anything? Water? Tea?" "I'm fine," Theresa said, which was not entirely accurate. She pushed the door open. Mrs. Park Sun-hee was seated at one end of a long conference table in a cream-colored suit, and she looked so composed and so completely different from the embarrassed woman at the small restaurant table that Theresa's understanding of the entire situation shifted sideways in her chest. "Theresa," Mrs. Park said warmly and stood, "I'm so glad you came." "Mrs. Park." Theresa walked to her, shook her hand, and then stood very still as the door behind her opened again. The man who came in was not what she'd expected, and she wasn't entirely sure what she'd expected. He was lean and quiet, and moved with the kind of deliberateness that meant he had learned to control the space around himself. He was wearing a dark suit without a tie, which on him read as a choice rather than an oversight. He looked at her directly when he entered the room, not past her, not at a point above her head, directly at her, with a stillness in his eyes that was somehow less frightening than she'd anticipated and more disquieting. "Ms. Mensah," he said, "my name is Sang Ha-jun. Please sit down." She sat. He sat across from her. Mrs. Park sat between them, which felt intentional. "My mother told me what happened last week," he said, "in some detail." He folded his hands on the table, unhurried. "I wanted to meet you." "Okay," Theresa said, and then, because she was her mother's daughter and couldn't pretend otherwise, "Who are you?" There was a pause that had something interesting in it, something almost like appreciation. "I'm someone who was raised to understand that the way people treat each other matters," he said. "The rest is context." Theresa looked at him. She looked at his hands on the table, the suit, the very quiet man who had come in through the door behind him and was standing near the window without being introduced. She looked at Mrs. Park, who was watching Theresa with that same reading expression from the restaurant. "I looked you up," Theresa said. A beat. "I figured," he said. "I didn't find a lot," she said, "but I found enough to understand what kind of meeting this might be." He nodded slowly. "And you came anyway." She looked at him steadily. "Mrs. Park called me. I wasn't going to ignore that." Something shifted in the room. It was subtle, Mrs. Park's expression, and the very slight change in the angle of Sang Ha-jun's head, like something he'd been testing had come back with an unexpected result. "I want to offer you help," he said, "for your mother. The medical costs, the payment plan, the prescription gap, all of it. And for your education, the licensing program, the fees, the lost income while you're in training. He said it plainly, without performance. My team has reviewed your situation. What I'm describing is a one-time arrangement, no ongoing obligation, no conditions. Theresa's hands were in her lap. She could feel her pulse in her wrists. Why? Because you sat with my mother, he said, when everyone else looked away, and you didn't even tell your own mother about it when you got home. She went very still. You investigated me. Yes. You know about my mother's medication, my applications. Yes. Theresa looked at the table for a moment. She thought about the pill organizer on Wednesday morning. She thought about the utility notice she'd moved to a different drawer so her mother wouldn't see it. She thought about the folded pamphlet. She felt something sharp and complicated pass through her. Not quite anger, not quite relief, something that didn't have a clean name. She looked up. You know what I'm going to ask you? Yes, he said again for the third time with the same weight. Is the money clean? The silence was different this time, longer. Mrs. Park was very still. Sang Ha-jun looked at her without flinching. No, he said, not all of it. She exhaled. It was a small sound, but everyone in the room heard it. I won't lie to you about what I am, he said. I know what asking you to accept this means. I know what you'd have to decide to believe about yourself to do it. A pause. I also know what your mother's next specialist appointment costs without insurance coverage. That's not fair, she said quietly. No, he said. It isn't. They sat with that for a moment, the three of them, the quiet man by the window, the recycled air, and the classical music still going faintly in the elevator down the hall. I need to think, Theresa said. Of course, he said. She stood. She was steadier than she expected to be. She nodded to Mrs. Park, who reached across the table and put her hand briefly over Theresa's and didn't say anything, which said everything. Theresa walked to the door. At the door, she stopped without fully turning. The restaurant manager, she said. Did you? He no longer works there, Sang Ha-jun said. And Mr. Bay personally apologized to my mother. She nodded once. There was a small, complicated feeling attached to that, something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite discomfort. She filed it away. She walked out. She spent the weekend with it. She sat with her mother on Saturday evening and watched a football game they had no investment in and ate jollof rice that came out too dry. And she did not say anything about Peachtree or Suits or Sang Ha-jun or the weight of an offer she couldn't untangle from the weight of everything else. On Sunday morning, she drove to the Korean Presbyterian Church in Clarkston. She hadn't been in a year, and sat in the back during the service and listened to a sermon she mostly followed, and afterward she walked around the block twice in the October cold before getting back in her car. She thought about her mother taking half doses. She thought about the $11,000 that still had a balance. She thought about the pamphlet and what was inside it and how long she'd been trying to set down the wanting. She thought about what Sang Ha-jun had said. I won't lie to you about what I am. She had met people who lied about what they were her entire life. Men who left. Landlords who said, of course, and then didn't. Insurance reps who said, it's processing. The distinction felt significant in a way she couldn't argue herself out of. She texted the number Ji-young had given her. I have conditions. Can we meet again? The response came in under 2 minutes. Of course, name the place. She named a coffee shop on Edgewood Avenue, which was not a marble lobby and did not have classical music, and he came alone, which she had not expected. He came in a plain jacket and ordered a black coffee and sat across from her at a table by the window, and outside the street was busy and ordinary, and somehow that made the whole thing feel more real, not less. Conditions, he said without preamble. He seemed to appreciate the word. The support from my mother goes directly to the providers, she said. Her doctors, the pharmacy. I don't handle cash. He nodded. The education fund goes to the program, Not to me. Another nod. Nothing that requires me to be in your world. She said it carefully. No access, no relationship, no debt that I can't see the bottom of. He was quiet for a moment. You understand that once I do this, people will know about it, within my circle. Is that a problem for me? It might be, he said. For that reason, I'd ask that you let me know if you're approached by anyone who makes you uncomfortable. As a precaution. She looked at him. You're telling me there's a risk. There's always a risk, he said. I'm telling you I'll manage it. She held her coffee cup with both hands and looked out the window at the street, at the ordinary Saturday foot traffic, someone walking a dog, 2 kids on bikes. My mother can't know where the help is coming from, she said. She'd say no, and I can't let her say no. He was quiet for a moment. What will you tell her? A grant, she said. There are real ones. She doesn't have to know it's not. All right, he said. I can make that work administratively. Theresa looked back at him. He was watching her with an expression that was hard to name. Not quite admiration, not quite curiosity. Something that was still in the process of becoming something else. Why are you doing this yourself? She asked. Why not just send a check? He considered the question. My mother described you, he said, as someone who sat with her when she was embarrassed and didn't make her feel small about it. He paused. I wanted to understand what kind of person does that. And? I think I'm starting to, he said. She should have left it there. She knew she should have. Instead, she heard herself say, What were you expecting? Someone easier to say no to, he said. There was a beat of silence, and then something happened that neither of them had been budgeting for. She laughed. It was short and surprised and entirely genuine, the kind of laugh that comes out before you can decide whether it's appropriate, and it changed the temperature of the table by several degrees. He didn't laugh, but something in his face loosened. It was like watching a lock turn without the door opening yet. Okay, she said, pulling herself back. We have a deal. He reached his hand across the table. It was a formal gesture in this specific context, which she appreciated. She shook it. My team will send you documentation, he said. Everything traceable to legitimate accounts. Your conditions will be in writing. Good, she said. They finished their coffee separately, him checking his phone, her looking at the street. It was an oddly peaceful 10 minutes. When he left, he said simply, Thank you, Theresa. Not for the agreement. It was clear from the weight of it that he meant the restaurant, meant the $22, meant the small act that had started all of this. She said, Tell your mother she raised you right. She meant it as a compliment. She also meant it as a reminder of where this started and what this was. He paused at the door for just a moment, then he walked out into the street. She was on the MARTA platform when the first strange thing happened. A man she didn't recognize, mid-40s, Korean, expensive coat too warm for the weather, sat down beside her on the bench without invitation and said, in a conversational tone, You should know that you're being watched, and that the people watching you aren't all on the same side. Theresa turned to look at him. Her pulse was very calm, which surprised her. Who are you? Someone who wants you to understand what you've walked into, he said. He didn't look at her directly. The girl from the restaurant, very touching, very useful. He paused. You should ask yourself why someone in his position would make this arrangement in person, without intermediaries, without leverage. He told me there was risk, she said. Did he tell you about Mireille? The train came. The man stood. Who's Mireille? Theresa said. He stepped toward the train door. Ask him, he said. And then he was on the train, and the doors closed, and the train left. She texted Ji Young. I need to speak with Sang Ha-jun, today if possible. Someone just approached me on the MARTA platform and said I should ask about someone named Mireille. The response took 4 minutes. We're sending a car. The car took her not to the Peachtree offices, but to the Dunwoody house, which she registered as a different level of something but didn't have time to process. She was shown into a sitting room off the main hall, cream walls, a painting she didn't look at properly, a window looking out onto the back garden where a Korean maple was doing something brilliant and orange in the October afternoon. Sang Ha-jun came in with Yoon Mi-rae behind him, which answered the question immediately. Theresa watched Mi-rae walk into the room and stood up slowly, and she understood several things at once. That this was the woman she'd been warned about, that Mi-rae was already aware she'd been warned, and that Sang Ha-jun was watching them both with an expression that was very carefully controlled. "Sit down," he said to both of them. They sat. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said to Theresa. She told him. The platform, the man, the coat, the specific phrase he'd used, not all on the same side. She watched Mi-rae's face as she spoke. Mi-rae's face was a remarkable piece of work. It revealed almost nothing, except for approximately 3 seconds in the middle of Theresa's account, something that moved across it like a shadow moving underwater. Gone before you could properly see it. But there. Sang Ha-jun said nothing for a moment when she finished. Then he looked at Mi-rae. The silence between them was old. It was the silence of 6 years of everything that had been said and unsaid. "Mi-rae," he said, just her name. Mi-rae looked back at him without flinching. "It was information management," she said. "I didn't have anyone approach her. I don't know who that man was. I flagged her file to a contact as a standard precaution, a new civilian variable in a sensitive operation. That's all." "You flagged her name and address," he said. "Her workplace, too," Theresa said. "That's why Carl let me go." The room went very still. Sang Ha-jun turned to look at Theresa. Something passed through his face that was rare and unguarded. Something close to anguish, quickly folded back in. Mi-rae was quiet. Whatever the internal accounting was, she was doing it silently. "Her job is gone because you sent her file to someone who sent word to her employer," he said to Mi-rae. Flat, not a question. "I didn't direct—" "It doesn't matter what you directed," he said. "You created the path." He stood. "Mi-rae." He said it differently this time, without the question of her name, just the weight of it. "Leave." She stood with the particular dignity of someone who knows they are wrong and intends to carry it with full composure. She looked at Theresa once, briefly, not apologetically, but not without something human in it. Then she left the room. The door closed. Theresa sat in the subsequent silence for a moment and then said, "Is she going to be a problem?" "No," he said. He sat back down. "She won't move against you." "How do you know?" "Because she's right that she went too far," he said, "and she knows it, and that matters to her, more than it looks like it does." Theresa sat with that. It was a complicated thing to know about someone who had just cost her her job. "I'll have the documentation expedited," he said. "The support begins immediately, not by the timeline we discussed." A pause. "And I'll make sure there's income replacement in the interim." "Don't," she said. He looked at her. "The deal was the deal," she said. "Medical and school. If you start adding to it every time something goes wrong in your world that touches me, then I don't know what this is anymore." She said it without heat, just plainly. "Keep the agreement we made." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're unusual," he said. "My mother would say I'm stubborn," she said. Something moved in his face again. The same almost thing that had happened in the coffee shop, a door at rest against its frame. "Is there anything you need right now?" he asked. "For your mother. Today." She thought about it. "Her Friday appointment is at 11. The parking at that hospital is terrible, and the lot is expensive, and usually I have to work until 9 the night before." He nodded. "I'll have a car there." "I'm driving her myself," she said. "The parking will be handled," he said. "You drive. The cost is handled." It was such a small thing. It was an enormous thing. She thought about her mother's hands folding around a cup of tea in that waiting room, the specific exhaustion of someone who has been sick for a long time in a system not designed for them. "Okay," she said. Thank you. November came, then December. Theresa's mother had her first specialist appointment without a payment anxiety for the first time in 2 years. The specialist ordered a new treatment protocol that the previous copay structure had made essentially theoretical. Celestine Mensah came home from that appointment and said, with the precision of a woman who notices things, "The paperwork was different today." "Grant program," Theresa said. "I applied a while ago." Her mother looked at her for a long time. "Theresa." "Mama, is everything all right?" "Everything is better than all right," Theresa said, and then, because she was not capable of lying to her mother about the important things. "I helped someone, and it came back. I can't explain more than that right now, but it came back." Celestine Mensah sat with that. Outside the apartment window, December Atlanta was doing its thing. Not cold enough for snow, too cold for comfort, the specific in-between season of the South. She looked at her daughter's face, at the thing in it that wasn't relief exactly, more like the absence of a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was extra. "Okay," her mother said. "Come sit with me." They sat together on the couch with the blanket from the church sale, and Celestine put on the gospel station, and Theresa laid her head on her mother's shoulder like she was 12 years old, and neither of them said anything else about it. The LPN program started in January. Theresa showed up on the first day in her good coat with a secondhand stethoscope she'd bought off a classifieds app, a thermos of her mother's tea, and the kind of focus that comes from having wanted something for long enough that when you finally get it, the wanting becomes very quiet and very clean. Her cohort was 12 people, 3 recent high school grads, a Haitian man named Reginald, who had been a nurse in Port-au-Prince for 15 years, and was doing the credentialing process in his 40s with complete dignity. A Guatemalan woman named Dahlia, who fell asleep in lecture twice the first week and apologized to no one. Several others. They were the kind of group that forms quickly when everyone is there for actual reasons. Theresa found that she was good at clinical reasoning. She was better at the patients. She had, it turned out, had a lot of practice already. Years of watching her mother, of learning to read what someone's body is telling you when they're trying not to worry you, of sitting with people in the difficult part and not making them feel small about it. She heard that from her instructor in the 4th week, a woman named Ms. Khoury, who had been a nurse for 30 years and distributed praise very sparingly. "Mensah," she said, reviewing Theresa's patient notes, "you have good instincts about what to leave out." Theresa didn't entirely understand the compliment until she thought about it on the drive home. Leaving out the parts that make people feel small, not narrating their difficulty back at them, sitting with them in the bad part without making the bad part the point. She thought about a small restaurant table and a woman with her hands folded in her lap. She thought about paying forward things you can't repay. She saw Sang Ha-jun twice more before spring. Once, at a distance, outside the Peachtree building when she had gone to sign a form Ji-young had prepared. He was getting into a car, and he saw her through the lobby glass, and he paused, just slightly, just long enough to nod. She nodded back. The car left. The second time was more deliberate. Mrs. Park called her personally, which was unexpected, and invited her to the house in Dunwoody for tea. It was a Sunday in February, cold and clear, and the Korean maple in the back garden had lost its leaves, but was doing something structural and elegant in the bare winter light. Theresa spent 3 hours in that kitchen. Mrs. Park taught her doenjang jjigae, the right fermented paste, the exact ratio of water, the precise moment to add the tofu so it holds its shape. They talked about her mother. They talked about nursing school. Mrs. Park told her in a very unadorned way about coming to Atlanta in 1984 with 2 suitcases and a husband who lasted 4 years and a son who she had decided the day he was born she would not apologize for. "You don't apologize for him?" Theresa asked, stirring the stew. "I worry about him," Mrs. Park said. "It's different." Sang Ha-jun came home midway through the afternoon and stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, looking at the scene. His mother at the counter, Theresa at the stove, the apartment filled with the smell of something good. He had the expression of someone encountering something they didn't know they'd been missing. He stayed for dinner. Nobody had specifically planned it. It became the plan. They ate the jjigae and rice and small side dishes Mrs. Park produced from the refrigerator like a magician. Kimchi, seasoned spinach, tiny dried fish that Theresa ate without comment because she had grown up eating kontamir and knew that the right response to someone's traditional food is to eat it and mean it. Sang Ha-jun ate across from her, and the conversation was ordinary and specific and occasionally funny in the particular way conversations are when the stakes are very quietly acknowledged by everyone at the table and no one states them directly. At one point, Theresa said something about a patient. No names, just a clinical situation. A detail about how hard it is to read pain levels in patients who've spent their whole lives minimizing. And Sang Ha-jun went still for a moment and then said very quietly, "My mother does that." Mrs. Park, serving more rice, did not look up. "Everyone who loves someone does that," she said. The table was quiet for a moment. Then Theresa said, "My mom has been asking when she gets to meet the people behind the grant program." There was a pause. Sang Ha-jun looked at her with something careful in his eyes. "She suspects," Theresa said. "She doesn't know, but she suspects it's people, not a program." She paused. "I told her a family helped us, that it was connected to someone I met through work." She glanced at Mrs. Park. "That part is true." Mrs. Park said, "I would very much like to meet your mother." It was said simply, in the way Mrs. Park said most things, without question or condition, just the fact of it, offered cleanly. Theresa looked at her. Something moved in her chest, old and large and not entirely familiar. "She makes kontamir stew," she said. "The first time someone comes over, she makes kontamir stew and won't let anyone help and will try to send them home with leftovers." "I've never had it," Mrs. Park said. "It's good," Theresa said. The two mothers met in March at Celestine Mensah's apartment on Memorial Drive on a Saturday that smelled like spring getting ready to happen. Celestine made the stew. She set the table with the good cloth she saved for actual occasions. She was moving better. The new protocol was working. Not a miracle, but a steady, buildable improvement, the kind that lets you plan ahead again. Mrs. Park arrived with a tray of homemade songpyeon, small rice cakes stuffed with sesame and honey, and presented them to Celestine with both hands, the Korean way. Celestine received them the same way, both hands, which she had looked up specifically because Theresa had told her enough for her to know. They sat at the kitchen table and ate and talked for 2 hours, and the conversation was not uncomplicated. Two women from completely different worlds negotiating a connection that had arrived in their lives sideways, through their children, through a $22 act that had set everything else in motion. But it was real. The food was real. The laughter, when it came, over a misunderstanding about the word spicy that turned into a 5-minute comedy of mutual reassurance, was entirely, completely real. Sang Ha-jun waited outside. He had driven Mrs. Park, and he had not been invited in, and he understood that perfectly. He stood by the car in the cool March air and listened to the sound of laughter from the third-floor window and felt something settle in him that had been in motion for a long time. He didn't try to name it. He had learned, mostly, to let the true things be. Yoon Mi-rae sent a formal apology in writing, through an intermediary, 6 weeks after the sitting room confrontation. It was brief and precise and contained no excuses, only an acknowledgement of the consequence her action had created and a statement that it would not happen again. Theresa read it once, filed it away, and did not respond. Not out of coldness, but because there wasn't anything left to say. Mi-rae had made a choice. The choice had a consequence. The consequence was survived. Everyone knew where the line was now. She heard later from Ji-young that Mi-rae had taken on a different operational role, still within the organization, still invaluable, but no longer positioned where personal discretion could become structural risk. She had apparently accepted the change without argument. Theresa thought about that for a moment and then thought about something Ms. Corey had said in a different context entirely. The people who are hardest on others are usually maintaining some kind of wall. The wall comes down when the cost gets too high. She filed that away too. In April, Theresa passed her first major practicum assessment. She called her mother from the parking lot of the simulation center, sitting in the Civic with the engine off, and said, "I passed." Her mother said, "I know you did." "You don't know," Theresa said, laughing. "I know you," her mother said. She sat in the parking lot for a while after hanging up, in the spring afternoon light, with the windows down. She was thinking about the October night 10 months ago, parking in this same lot outside a different building, counting $31 on her thigh and knowing exactly what it meant. She was thinking about the cost of things and what they become once you've paid them. She was thinking that her mother was right, which her mother usually was. Kindness returns. Not always in ways that make sense from the outside, not always in the form you expect or the form you deserve, or the form that is uncomplicated or clean. Sometimes it returns through the back door, wearing a dark suit and carrying its own set of difficulties. Sometimes it requires you to make a decision about who you are and what you can live with, and what you're willing to say out loud in a room full of people who have power over things that matter to you. Sometimes it requires you to say, "Is the money clean?" and to hear the answer and decide what to do with the truth. She started the car. She drove home on Buford Highway, past Hannock Fusion, still there, different name on the manager's badge now, apparently, past the Vietnamese grocery, past the hair braiding salon, past the Korean chestnut cart that was back out for spring. Atlanta doing its ordinary thing, all its communities stacked against each other, invisible hierarchies and visible kindnesses, and all the transactions of daily life that never make it into any story and make up every story. She was going to be a nurse. Her mother was going to get better. She had sat with a woman she didn't know and paid $22 she didn't have. It had mattered. It had mattered enormously. Not because there was a reward waiting for it. She hadn't known about the reward, couldn't have known, and if she had known, the gesture would have been something different and smaller. It mattered because of what it was at the moment it happened, a choice made in the dark, for no audience, for no return. That's the kind of choice that stays, the kind that tells you who you are after the moment is over. Theresa Mensah turned onto Memorial Drive, rolled the windows up against the spring evening, and drove home to her mother. I wrote this story because I wanted to explore what it means to be truly seen, not by the people you're performing for, but by the ones you didn't know were watching. What would you have done in Theresa's position? Would you have accepted the help, knowing where some of it came from? And what do you think Sang Ha-jun is really looking for? Is this about gratitude, or is it the beginning of something he hasn't named yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this one feel like home to you, consider subscribing to Afro Korean drama. There's always another one coming.